Finding Indiana Jones in video games isn't a terribly difficult task. Look no further than Tomb Raider and Uncharted. But unlike the other monolithic creation of George Lucas, Indiana Jones has had considerably less obvious presence in video games. So when this little indie title by Robotality comes along, promising an Indiana Jones-esque experience, harkening back to the 1930s pulp action adventure in the Near East with larger-than-life Nazis and occult rituals and exploration and a jeep in a desert and tons of action, well boy, this guy got excited. Unfortunately, the excitement didn't last long. So have you heard about Pathway?
Ra will never see the light of day again.
There's a lot of problems with this game, but before we get into all of its struggles and flaws, I want to stress what Pathway does remarkably well, and that's the aesthetic, the feel, and the atmosphere of this game. On paper, a squad-based 1930s Indiana Jones roguelike-exploration-tactics game sounds like something totally beautiful. And in the first hour of the game, you really have this overwhelming sense of comfort. The pixel art is gorgeous, the characters you get to pick from seem hand-selected from this exaggerated, tropish, awesome cast that seems to be right out of the 1930s pulp action adventures. The setting of the Near East is done wonderfully well through the artistry and style, the lush environment, sandy deserts, ancient crypts, and a few biblical references. Pathway through visual and audio to me nails the vibrancy in the aesthetics that one would expect when translating Indiana Jones from the big screen to a video game. There were small bits of characterization that I loved in particular. Jackson was with me throughout all of my adventures, and he was the feisty character from America, the guns blazing daredevil that, while so stereotypical, brought me closer into Pathway's world. I also spent a lot of time with Pereira, the Brazilian ship captain, and his grizzled toughness and bulldozing down landlubbers into the desert with his trusty shotgun. And then there was Omar, the Arabian nobleman, and then there was Miguel, the Spanish war veteran who had no time for fascism, or Baron, the German double agent, who's a lieutenant and weaseled me out of more than one particularly Nazi ambush. Maybe I put a little bit of myself into these characters because I guess in hindsight there weren't really that many of these defining moments. But when the particular traits and uniqueness to each of my party members coalesced and came alive in North Africa or the Arabian Peninsula, oh boy, was I just soaking up every moment. In particular, I found all of the interactions with my German antagonists to be a particular delight. There wasn't any heaviness or somberness to these interactions, and the writers leaned more into the German Oriental obsession that was ignited in the 1890s and culminated in all of those dreams of building a railroad from Berlin to Baghdad. And during my first adventure, I really liked the game of Pathway itself. I liked node hopping across beautiful locales and vistas and discovering little secrets and unearthing all the glorious loot and shooting up Nazis and zombies around ancient ruins and desert camps. The story beats were minimal but present. The characterization was there but minor. It felt great. I loved it. The first 2 hours of Pathway were so awesome. So when I finished Adventure 1, I moved on to thwart the next Nazi threat in the Middle East. And slowly, things fell apart. What I didn't like about Pathway vastly outweighs what I did like. By the end of my time with the game, which was just under 11 hours, I was really struggling to finish. I was flicking through my phone when I waited for my turn in combat encounters. I mind-numbingly strategized the easiest and quickest way to get to my goals. And there's a lot of reasons of why this happened, so I want to break down for you what Pathway struggles to achieve so you can decide if this game is right for you. Pathway is broken into 5 separate adventures. This kind of forms the basis of the roguelite mechanics of the game. Completing the first adventure requires navigating the Maghreb to rescue your friend from the Nazis. Upon completion, you unlock the second adventure, the second leads to the third, and so on. There's difficulty sliders that you can change for each, but for the purposes of this review, I just kept everything static. I think I played one of my adventures in night mode, but that didn't really add anything to the game besides a different visual lens. But within each adventure, failure means permadeath, I think. When the hit points of all of your characters reach 0, the adventure stops and you get sent back to the main menu to try again. To be honest, I didn't find Pathway to be a very difficult game at its normal unadjusted difficulties, and a roguelite typically has built-in mechanics and systems about failure and success and how that ties into these broader meta elements that strengthen you throughout all of your playthroughs, but the effect here in Pathway is really minimal. And this leads to my first criticism that fits into a broader complaint of the game. The base camp or the character pool or the adventure preparation screen or whatever we want to call it is very, very, very minimal. And the fact that it doesn't have a name is perhaps emblematic of the weakness here, and in fact I think it is. Characters level up through adventures, they collect new gear, get new loot, but navigating these menus is just annoying and frustrating and confusing. The particular example that I'll call your attention to is that you can't manage all your character equipment at once. You have to recruit a character and then progress to the next screen, fiddle with their weapon, equip, figure out what's the best option, then you gotta go back to that initial screen, select a different character, and so on and so forth. Your loot capacity is small and ironically not one of the things that you can upgrade in the game. Proper character management is important because you can recruit up to 2 characters during each adventure. You start each adventure with 2 that you select, but as you progress through the multiple screens and nodes, you have the chance to recruit 2 more. But which character you recruit in each adventure is totally randomized. So of course, you always want to make sure your party members have the best weapons, items, and gear. You want to make sure that your sniper guy actually has a sniper rifle equipped and that you didn't actually forget in that character management screen to give his sniper rifle to somebody else because it was a better version, or so forth. And so additionally, the only real meta upgrades to this, because you do collect currency, you collect cash throughout your game that you kind of can use on multiple merchants and stuff throughout, but you can also use them to upgrade other things when you get to this character progression, character selection page. But the only 2 things you can upgrade are your Jeep fuel tank and your party ammo box. And both of these are basically useless because the upgrades don't actually increase your starting amount, only the maximum amount of resources you can carry during each of your adventures. And again, you can't upgrade how many items or equipment that you can carry either. Also, if a character dies in an adventure, you have to pay a sum to heal them and make them ready to reuse, unless you want them to sit out for one particular playthrough. But you'll never really want to do this because XP isn't shared across your squad mates. So you'll always want to rely on the characters that have had the most exposure, vanquished the most enemies, and experienced the most events as you go across the Arabian desert. So you'll always want to pay cash, the $500 or whatever, to take your character out of the hospital to allow them to reuse it. So I don't really get why it's there. All of this is minimal, kind of feeling to the point of underpolished or unsubstantial. Does Pathway really care about squad management or not? And is Pathway kind of like a roguelite? Or really are each of these adventures kind of more so like a mission from your base camp, as if more in the traditional lines of like XCOM? And this crisis of mechanical identity comes further under fire when you actually play the game. But before we get into combat, which is I think what a lot of people are talking about, I want to talk about the game's exploration and decision making, because to be honest, these were the things that I was more excited for. The premise of resource scarcity always sounds exciting. Do I risk it for the biscuit, or do I try to trudge along with my average loadout? In Pathway, the resource scarcity question often surrounds your fuel supply. I think there was only 1 or 2 instances where I was starting to get concerned about my ammo supply. It was usually always about petroleum. Sometimes you need to limp along to the final node or 2 as your Jeep fuel runs out. Sometimes you're swimming in such a big pool of petroleum it would make the Saudis jealous. But here's the thing. There's always a randomness to your fuel supply, and there's not a whole lot that you can do to prepare, and there's not a whole lot that you can do to learn about the game in order to understand how it works better. Some node events just cause you to lose it, straight up. Sometimes there's no trader on a map, or he's at the very end where your objective is, so you have no chance to buy any fuel. Other times you can hit fuel as loot in consecutive battles and not have to worry. Regardless, each scenario leads you to play conservatively, because you never know, and there's not a whole lot that you can do to prepare. And this conservative playstyle bleeds into other elements of Pathway's exploration. I would love to hit every little spot of the map to give a full sense of adventure, but this fuel mechanic instead makes me carefully and literally count out the shortest route to my goal. Am I supposed to enjoy a sense of exploration and adventure, or is this just a mad dash to the finish? Over the course of my 5 adventures, I maybe visited one of these question mark events 2 or 3 times. Know why? They were always out of the way. Did I feel like I skipped out on some of Pathway's content? I think so. Which made me sour, because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Am I supposed to fail the adventure to maybe unlock some cool encounter, or am I supposed to pass the adventure to make it a success by taking the strictest beeline to victory? And I think this is the exacerbated example of the broader problem of nodule hopping. You can consecutively get back to back to back nothing happen events. Other times, you can get 2 fights in a row, then heal up all of your dying comrades, and then whammo, you hit a camp, which gives you the option to freely restore all of your party members' health and armor. And there's nothing really that you can do, prepare, or learn in order to mitigate or eliminate these factors. And all of these examples happen to me more than once. An adventure requires 1 part random whoa, I wasn't ready for that, and 1 part preparedness. And I think Pathway misses the mark on how to make the player feel simultaneously in control, but also at the whims of the desert. And so the other example of randomness and why it's problematic here in Pathway is how character traits play out in some of these encounters. Each of your party members has a selection of traits, some more than others, some have 1 or 2, some have upwards of 3. Jackson, for example, is a daredevil, which allows him specific decisions in certain events. He can go boldly run up to the altar during some occult ritual and topple the statue. Awesome, right? The problem is that this daredevil choice is always marked as a gamble, so you don't know really, will Jackson be able to run up and topple the statue, or will something stop him, or will he fail? But I never really know the percentage chance of success. And furthermore, Jackson level 1 and Jackson level 5 do not seem to demonstrate any difference in their awesome daredevilness. I don't get it. Why can't we choose to level up some of these character traits? And in the case of more than 1 trait, get to choose. Like Pereira has big game hunter and survivalist. What if I want my Pereira to be more of a survivalist than a big game hunter? Or maybe another player cares more about being a big game hunter. I don't know. Because guys, like I really like what Pathway is trying to be. And I don't want it to be like any other game. I want it to be its own thing, but it can't even seem to figure out what it wants to be for itself. Because lastly, I want to talk about the combat, because here too, there's an awful mix-up. Combat is meant to be fast, fluid, and concise. A bing, bang, boom, if you would. And the early adventures really lean into this. I enjoyed some of the combat early on, and I thought it was fun. I don't think every character needs to have an Overwatch ability or to interact with the fog of war better, but I do get very frustrated sometimes when I am able to shoot a Nazi with my rifle, but for some reason I can't use my rifle's burst fire ability on the same target. So that really sometimes got me confused with some of the angles and the cover systems and the accuracy percentages, but that aside. What I got way more frustrated with was the increase in combat time, because it runs contrarian to that thing I just said, which is how combat is meant to be bing bang boom. In Adventure 1, I seldom had a combat encounter go beyond 3 or 4 minutes, but in later adventures towards the end of the game, combat encounters were hovering much closer to the 10-minute mark. Specifically when I was dealing with the zombies from the Brotherhood, as well as the Nazi medics. All of these enemy types draw out combat. For medics in particular, it became a chase around the map on more than 1 occasion. Ritualists always outnumber you. and the zombies just move so frickin' slow. And all of these factors combine to make Pathway's combat seem really shallow because it drags on for so long. But what if these higher level combat encounters were also kept to 3 to 4 minutes? It would be great. It wouldn't be a slog. I wouldn't be flicking through my phone as I groan waiting for the zombies to finish shambling across the maps. And lastly, maybe just kind of like the nail in the coffin, when you finish Adventure 5, it just ends. That's it. Pathway is seemingly done. There's no big final battle, no cutscene, no broader narrative closure. But I did want to love Pathway, and I'm left with the impression that I don't know what Pathway wants to be. It feels underdeveloped. It doesn't feel whole and complete. The art style and the atmosphere and the music of this game can only really help it go so far. So with a heavy heart, Pathway receives a negative score from Questmarker. I don't think this game needs to have necessarily great tactical combat or great exploration or stellar writing, but I think that Pathway needs something more. I think Pathway needs to be honest with itself. Are we here to adventure and explore, or are we here to survive? Are we here for strong meta roguelite mechanics? Are we here for party management that's intricate and interesting? Are we here for simple combat encounters? Are we here for quick? Are we here for long and tedious ones? Like, I don't know. So I guess I love the idea of Pathway, but for now, I'm gonna have to find my sense of adventure somewhere else.